The Kosala kingdom was paralyzed by a single name, Angulimala. He was a killer who stalked the dense woods, murdering travelers not for gold, but for their fingers, which he wore as a grisly trophy around his neck. Inside that forest, a strange pursuit is taking place. The assassin is sprinting, his muscles strained and his blade drawn, yet he cannot close the gap on a lone monk who is merely walking at a steady, rhythmic pace. Every time Angulimala pushes himself to catch up, the monk remains just out of reach. Finally, exhausted and bewildered, the killer screams at the monk to stop. This moment in the woods marks the end of a long, bloody journey. To understand why a serial killer would suddenly halt his blade, we have to look back at the specific events that turned a peaceful student into a predator. Before the murders began, the boy was named Ahimsaka, the non-violent one. He was known for his sharp intellect and a naturally calm disposition, quickly becoming the most trusted pupil of his teacher. That status created a target. His fellow students, fueled by resentment, fed their teacher lies of betrayal. The teacher eventually believed them. In a fit of cold anger, he told Ahimsaka that his education would only be complete once he presented a guru dakshina, a fee of 1,000 human fingers. This shows the collapse of his moral logic. His identity was built on absolute obedience to his mentor. When the mentor demanded blood, that same loyalty forced him to abandon his own nature and begin a cycle of violence to fulfill a debt. He was a man operating under a distorted sense of duty. Every life he took was an attempt to prove his worth to a teacher who had already betrayed him. Back in the present, the Buddha is walking directly into the killer's territory. Villagers had run to intercept him, pleading with him to turn back, because they knew the killer spared no one who entered those woods. The Buddha didn't argue or try to explain. He simply continued his walk, unarmed and entirely focused, entering the very heart of the forest. When Angulimala finally demands that he stop, the Buddha turns and speaks with a clarity that cuts through the killer's rage. He says, "I have stopped, Angulimala. I have stopped harming others. It is you who has not stopped." These words target the one thing the killer hadn't considered, his own exhaustion. The statement forces him to look at the momentum of his own violence. For years, every human Angulimala met followed a predictable script. They screamed, they begged, or they fought. Each reaction only reinforced his belief that the world was a place of constant conflict. But the monk standing before him offers a different reality. He sees the Buddha's eyes, which hold no fear and no desire to win a fight. Instead of a victim or an enemy, he sees a person who is simply at peace. The killer is left with nowhere to direct his rage. His violent world requires an opponent, and the Buddha refuses to be one. The sword slips from his hand because the entire foundation for his anger has evaporated. By addressing the student who was lost years ago, rather than the killer standing there today, the Buddha disarms a man that no weapon could touch. Angulimala knelt in the dirt, discarded his garland of fingers, and asked to become a disciple. He followed the Buddha back to the city, trading his sword for a monk's robe. But inner change doesn't mean the world forgets the past. The families of those he murdered were still there, and their grief was still fresh. When he walked into the village, he wasn't met with respect. The people recognized him. They threw stones and struck him with sticks, leaving him bleeding on the ground. The Buddha told him to endure the pain without a single thought of retaliation. This suffering was the weight of his past actions coming back to him, and his task was to carry it without returning to violence. His silence in the face of these attacks proved his change was real. He didn't fight back because the man who lived by the sword had truly ceased to exist. This story highlights the difference between using force to suppress a threat and using understanding to dissolve it. It suggests that even the most extreme cycles of harm can be interrupted when we refuse to engage with the fear that drives them. It leaves us with the idea that no person is beyond the reach of a better path, provided they are met with a clarity that outweighs their own confusion. In the end, the most dangerous man in the kingdom was stopped not by a greater weapon, but by the simple presence of someone who was